Hey Chase, Greg. Hey, so I was just about ready to start the Hangout. Can you see me on your end there? Yeah, because I'm watching on one computer and I can't see it. Okay, so you're just youtube.com/Club Cubase? Okay, let me try. And then are you just seeing it on the front page? Okay, okay, um, okay, okay. We're just okay. So if I don't see it, where would I? So I can monitor comments. I don't see it now. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So should. All right. So are you seeing my screen? Okay. All right. Okay. So I can see it on my computer now. So I have it on another computer. Yeah. No. No. Okay. I see it on side. All right. Okay. Yep. I see it. All right. All right. Thanks. Bye. All right. We'll get started in a couple minutes here. If you guys have questions, you can type them in the comments field. If you wanted to see particular topics. All right, we'll get started in a couple minutes here. If you guys have questions, you can type them in the comments field. If you wanted to see particular topics. We'll wait a couple more minutes, see if people are coming in. But again, if you have topics that you wanted to cover, just ask them in the comments field. Be happy to kind of go over any Steinberg questions you have. see if people are coming in. But again, if you have topics that you wanted to cover, just ask them in the comments field. Be happy to kind of go over any Steinberg questions you have. I'll make my best to kind of point out any differences between the Mac and PC. So it might be like an Alt versus a Command in keyboard shortcuts, but we'll try to get that all. I'll mention that as we go along. Make my best to kind of point out any differences between the Mac and PC. So it might be like an Alt versus a Command in keyboard shortcuts, but we'll try to do that all. I'll mention it as we go along. I'm going to do a quick level check, see if you guys can hear the drums here okay. Can you hear my voice and hear the drums? Do a quick level check, see if you guys can hear the drums here okay. Can you hear my voice and hear the drums? And once again, if you have any particular topics that you want to see covered, please go ahead and enter them into the comments field, and then we'll kind of be happy to kind of answer any of your topics. Otherwise, we'll take a look at some of the new features in Cubase 7.5. All right, we'll get started in about a minute or two. As I'm doing this, realize that there's about a 30-second latency from when I talk to when you guys hear it. Topics that you want to see covered, please go ahead and enter them into the comments field, and then we'll kind of be happy to kind of answer any of your topics. Otherwise, we'll take a look at some of the new features in Cubase 7.5. To Mark, I had shut off my laptop that had audio that I'm kind of monitoring, like you guys are, separate laptops, so you might be hearing that audio echo through the microphone again. So we're going to try to do these clinics once or twice a month. We'll see how how the format kind of works out. This is our first time doing it, so do chambered LP. All right, so let's go ahead and start. We'll take a look at some of the new features that were found in Cubase 7.5. One of them is the inclusion of the brand new Groove Agent SE4 sampling drum machine. And this has a very cosmetic similar appearance to what we have with Groove Agent 1 in previous versions of Cubase. But now what we're able to do is to actually come here and have a little more control. So one of the things that you'll notice is that there's going to be different playback modes. So as I'm here, I could actually kind of select all my different pads. And if I hold down my shift key, I can select all the pads and switch the actual playback mode. So if I wanted to actually play back in standard resolution, like 24-bit resolution through our sound cards, or if I wanted to mimic a drum machine, I can just come right over here and go to a vintage, which would sound like a 12-bit vintage drum machine. Now, we would all allow you to come over here and also have a turntable mode. So one of the things that people would do is actually come right over here and take a 33 LP RPM record and then sample it at 45 RPM for to have more sample time, and then slow it down again. So we could actually just listen to these different playback modes here. So if I wanted to play this, let's say we'll play this pattern. And as we listen to it, we'll go back between the different playback modes. So it's standard. Now to vintage. And also the turntable mode where you hear some of the aliasing. And we'll go back to our standard mode. Now we could also very easily do mixing right from here. So if I just wanted to select one drum sound, I could actually just change the sound of my kick. Or if I wanted to tune. Now we could also do some interesting things with tuning. So if I wanted to come here, if I wanted to randomize the tuning, you could solo a particular pad here. So say this little percussion element. And now I'll adjust my volume here. Then if I go to my pitch tab, I can now just randomize the pitch. So taking one sample and then being able to change it. Or if I want to be a little more creative with my kick drum, we could also use our envelopes. So if I want to select my kick, I can adjust my envelope time. So you get a lot of really creative controls with pitch correction. Now there's also the ability of applying filters to the selected pad. So if I wanted to come here, I could apply just a filter. my kick drum. Or if I wanted to do it to all selected pads in my drum kit, I could come right over here and just activate my filter. Or to turn the filters off, just kind of click here. Now, if I don't like any of the changes that I made, you actually have multiple levels of undo as well. So you have 20 levels of undo to take you right back to where you were. Now, we can also have some creative flexibility with using the mixer section. So if I wanted to come here, I could have plugins applied to just particular aspects. So if I wanted to have my studio EQ applied to the whole kit, I could come right here. Or if I wanted to apply a reverb to just one particular aspect, I could have 4 different aux sends, and each of these aux sends could have their own effects. So if I wanted to come here, I could add reverb to aux send 4, go back to the edit page, and now go to the amplifier section and select just my hand clap here, and then I'll go to aux 4, and as I do that, this is why you can have effects on each individual pad. Now, each pad can also have up to 16 stereo outputs. So if you wanted to have a different stereo output for each of these, you could just click right there, select the pad, and select a different output right there. Now, we can also do some great elements with drag and drop. So if I wanted to come here, let's say if I have a number of snare drums and I wanted to kind of make my own drum kit, I can come right here, and let's say I have a number of snare drums right here. And let's say that we have 8 different levels of velocity here that we've recorded. So what I could do now is actually select these different snares, and I could drag them onto a pad. And as we drag these from our project window, we can now just come right here, and if I see 1 square, that means that it's actually going to place all the pads directly on, all the samples directly onto that pad. If I see 2, this will replace existing samples that are on that pad. Or if I see 3, this will automatically take each of the samples and chromatically map it across the pads. So if I wanted to build a velocity levels of 8 snares, I'm just going to drag it onto this pad, and now we could see our 8 different samples selected here. Now as I click here, we can now, as I choose, you can see what samples are being triggered from my velocity position right here. Now if I wanted to not have that be strictly based on velocity, and you could adjust the velocity accordingly here, I could also select layer, or if I wanted to do round robin, so that every time I select a snare sample, it'll just cycle through the samples. Or you could have it be completely random, so every time you hit the snare drum, it's going to play back a completely random sample. Or a random exclusive, which will allow you to not have any repetitions with your random. Now if you wanted to layer sounds, you could also just drag and drop from existing audio parts from your project window. So if I wanted to come here I could take, let's say if I have 3 kick drums, I'm just going to grab my range selection tool, and we'll take just our kicks here. And now I could drag these onto a pad. And let's say these are 3 different microphones. Instead of wanting these to switch at different velocity levels, I may want these to all be layered together, so that when I hit the sample, all 3 of those will be layered together. Now, many of us will work with drum loops as well. So if I wanted to, I could come here, and let's look at another technique that we could do is if I have a drum loop, let's say right here, I can now just drag that drum loop directly onto the pad, and as I do this, I can now just trigger that drum loop accordingly. Now, if I wanted to switch the tempo of my drum loop, what I could do is if I go to my sample, I could place this into audio warp. I'm going to select music mode and then choose tempo. Now, as I do this, if I change the tempo in my project, let's say to 168, now when I play and trigger the sample, it plays it at the tempo directly from my project window. Now back to the original tempo. Now another trick that we could do is if we go to our slice tab, I could create audio slices. And as soon as I've done that, it's now sliced our drum loop and then taken each slice and mapped it to different pads directly on our interface. Now as I do this, we also see this little icon here which would allow us to drag the information, and now what that's going to do is create a MIDI file. And let's say if we want to play this back, and let's duplicate this, and I just want to do a couple of variations here. So I can have the same exact sounds and the same groove. And what we can do now is listen to this. Now we're going to trigger the MIDI slices. And have variations. So very, very easy to kind of construct and deconstruct loops. Now, as we've created these parts, they will automatically show up in our pattern layer. And these will just be different patterns that we could trigger, in fact, from MIDI. So if I wanted to come here, I could actually just drag this pattern directly onto a pad and be able to trigger those series of notes. So even if I wanted to come here to my very first example, you could actually load up entire kits with patterns. So when I go to my pattern layer here, I can now just kind of click here and send a MIDI message and have the pattern automatically change. This you can adjust the swing, the velocity scale, if you want to switch immediately or on the next measure, the next beat. And again, any of these patterns could just be dragged and dropped directly onto our project window and then right back directly onto pads. So if you wanted to kind of build your own drum kits, build your own beats, a lot of great tools using the new Groove Agent SE4. So we'll go through that, and if you guys have any quick questions, you can type them in the comments field, and then we'll move on to a different topic. And if you guys want to cover any particular topics, just let us know. You could type in the comments field. We'll wait just a couple minutes, and then we'll move on. All right, okay, we got some topics here. So one would be I'd like to learn about making harmony vocals, and then we'll do some group comp editing and mix console. So let's cover the group comp editing. And this is a new function that was actually kind of introduced with Cubase 7.5 that's made this much easier, called track versions. Then we'll get to the other topics that were brought up. All right, so we've had this paradigm of comping for a long time inside of Cubase. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do was to make it a little more straightforward. So if I wanted to come here, we could have our different patterns. And let's say what I want to do is set this up to actually record different sources. Now what I want to do is I have this set up to record 16 different versions, so 16 different tracks being routed. So I'm going to come here and I have my 16 tracks, and then what I want to do at this point is actually right click, and I want to move these selected tracks to a new folder. Okay, now once we've placed these into a folder, I could now just come right here and we'll just activate group editing right here, so on the folder track. And what I want to do is now enable, I could go from the folder track and record and monitor enable these tracks right here. And I'm going to start this pattern, and I'm just going to record for 8 bars. Now one of the things that we could do is have this set up for punch in and punch out, and to set that is between your left and right locators. This is one of the questions also we had. So if you want to do punch in and punch out, it's set between the left and right locators, and then you can activate on the transport bar punch in and punch out right here, or hit the letters I plus O on your computer keyboard. Now a great tip, if you wanted to come here, is to select a region or select a part on your project window, then hit the letter P, and that will set the left and right locators around that selection for you. So if I wanted to punch in and out of this area here, I could just hit the letter P and then I and O followed right here on the main transport bar. So I'm going to record 4 different passes of 8 bars of 16 audio tracks. So if I wanted to come here, I'm going to just have this pattern generated here. So hit record. And you'll see that since the punch out is activated, as soon as it gets to the right locator, the recording will automatically stop. So if I wanted to do another lane, a new method of doing this in 7.5 is called a track version. So you can go to your project menu, and then at this point you could just say, I want to go to my track versions menu, and then we'll say new version. And now when I do this, I can still see all of my version, my take one right there. But now I have kind of a blank palette to work with. So if I wanted a different pattern here, I'll play this and then we'll record again. Now, another method of doing this is to just actually click on new version right here from the track versions inspector. So if I go to my track versions inspector, I could just click on new versions there. And let's say I wanted to do a different version here. And we'll do, let's say, our third pass. And let's do, you could also hit Alt-Shift-N, Control-Shift-N on PC. I believe that might be, I believe it's Control-Shift-N on Mac, but I could be mistaken. And then I could come here, let's do a fourth variation. So if I wanted to switch between these different takes, I could just click right here, and as I play, I could say, okay, this will be our fourth idea, first idea, a variation, our third idea. And we could actually double click here and label these. So I'll call it straight. And let's call this, this one has like a triplet tom. This one will have, let's say this take is more of a swing feel. Sorry about that. And this one we'll just call the hi-hat as an open hi-hat. So now I can just switch between these different takes to see which one I like best. Now if I take the group editing off, I can now say, okay, I really like the, and go here to the track name. You'll see a little pop down list. Like say I want to swing kick drum on that take. Or if I want it to all be, so if I just select just this one, I'll change to a different kick track. Or if I wanted the open hi-hat from the last take, I could just select only that track and switch to hi-hat. so you can mix and match different tracks from different takes quite easily. And the beauty of this also is you don't have to duplicate tracks, sometimes using a lot of unnecessary resources where you have 96 tracks playing back 6 versions of 16 tracks. But if we want to do kind of another form of assembly, I could go to my duplicate version here. And now when you come here, I'm just going to have the very first track duplicated. So if I wanted to delete that, I could. But I'll say let's duplicate the very first variation. And what I want to do is I'm going to select the second take here. And let's say the second 2 bars from measures 3 and 4, I'm going to select, and since the group editing is enabled, it's going to select all the different takes. Then I could go to my edit menu, say copy, go to this take, and then paste. And I could do the same for the next couple bars here. So say I want to go to my third idea, my swing idea. And then you could also just come here, right click, copy, select the composite or master take, if you will, paste, and then you could do it kind of for the last take here. Say, okay, so let's copy. And you could use Command or Control C for copy and paste the standard keyboard shortcuts on Mac or PC. So now I do this, we'll listen to take 1, our regular take straight, then our triplet toms, now our swing take, and our open hi-hats. Now, if you're kind of used to the paradigm of working with our lanes, so if I wanted to come here, let's say if I was doing just one particular take here, and I wanted to only work with my lane paradigm, kind of like what a lot of us have been used to inside of Cubase. So if I want to do like one track here, so let's just say, okay, as I do this one track and record. So now if you wanted to look at your lanes view, what's cool about this is you can now just select your lanes, right click, and then when you go to your track versions, or you could just access it right here and get your track versions, you could just create lanes from versions or create versions from track lanes. So that way you could kind of go back and forth and easily convert your different track versions into lanes and lanes into track versions, etc. Now the track versions aren't necessarily limited to just working only with audio. So if I wanted to come here, I could take MIDI tracks as well. So if I wanted to say, okay, let's just grab this part here. If I want to take this harp part, and let's say I had a different idea, I could just click here and switch between my different harp ideas, if you will. Or this could also be tied into our tempo track. So if I want to try a different tempo track idea, or a third tempo track idea. Or even different chord track ideas. different variation on the chord track here. With this tempo track. So you could do a lot of really cool things with the track versions, not only just for audio tracks, but also for dealing, with more creative aspects like MIDI, chord tracks, and your tempo tracks. All right, next we'll take a look at using the chord track and working with harmonies on that. And again, if you have more questions, I see some more of the topics like Magneto. And if there's other basic stuff, if you wanted to kind of specify what you want to see, we can do towards the end just we'll go over some basic stuff on a project window that a lot of people tend to miss that can be really helpful for you. So next we'll come over here and work on chord tracks and with harmonies. And there's a question if the video will remain up. Yes, the video will be online here, and where you can just have complete access to it to watch afterwards. All right, so one of the things that we introduced with Cubase 7 was the chord track. So the chord track has a lot of very powerful connotations and uses. But one of the most creative ones I've seen is using it this way. And one is if we have a piano part, and we recognize this as probably a piano part looking at it in the MIDI domain. One of the things that you could do if you don't have a chord track or you don't know what chords you've actually played is we're going to have the capability to right click, and then if you go to the chord track, to select make chords. And then you could include, bass notes, different tensions, or if there's arpeggiators, or, extract the chords from the arpeggios, or, how to interpret sustain pedal. So I'll just hit OK here. And as I do this, it's now kind of mapped out the chord progression for the song. So if I wanted to just kind of come right over here, all right, so we have our vocal here. Now we can kind of treat any monophonic audio file in this same way. So if I wanted to, I could double click, and then we could go to our Very Audio tab, and then I'm just going to activate the Very Audio tab here, and we'll just find some. All right, so we'll just come here. All right, so here's our pitches of the Very Audio. So it's done its analysis. And one of the things that you could actually do that's very handy is you could actually see on chord track a new coloring scheme for the Very Audio. So usually you could have it by the event or by pitch if you wanted to have each pitch be a different color. But now we could also see chord track. And what this is useful is you see some red notes, a green note, and a blue note. Green notes fall means that those notes are falling within the chord that's been analyzed here. So as we wanted to come here, a green note will automatically, that means that note is within the chord. A blue note means that's within the scale or the key of the song. And a red note means that it's out of key and out of scale and not within a chord. So if I wanted to come here and move this note and we'll make it a red color, I'll now just hit play. You stare at the ground. We'll do this with the chords. And we could probably see that or hear that that note's not the best note. But if I move it to a green note here and play, so at that point, I know that if it's within a green note, that there's a good chance that that note will work musically. Now, one of the great things that we could do, since we know what the chords are, if I wanted to listen to a particular phrase, so let's listen to this one. And I wanted to add some harmonies. Since we know what the chords are, we've defined what the chords are, I can now just grab my range selection tool, select that range, and now at this point, we'll say, okay, I want to grab this, and I'll go to my audio menu, and I'll say, let's generate harmony voices. And I could do up to 4 harmony voices at once. And let's come here and I'll just say, let's do 2 to start with. And I'll just kind of drop these in context here. We'll adjust the volume just a tad bit. And it's given us a soprano and an alto harmony. So now if I want to listen to it, we'll play back. Now if I didn't want a soprano, what I could actually do is go to my chord track here and tell it to give me a tenor. And this will change the voicings of the harmonies. Now what else is really cool is you can now just kind of take all 3 parts together. I'm going to select them and then hit the enter key on the computer keyboard. And now we could actually see all the parts laid out for you. So we'll come right over here and we'll play. So if I click on one of the other voices, I can now have what was my alto voice giving me my tenor voice, my soprano rather. And now you could just kind of move these notes just based and judging, looking at the musical colors of it to know which of these notes will kind of work in different harmonies. So this way you could kind of graphically switch between each of the different tracks and see each of the voices and how the counterpart works. So you could come up with some really great results with that. Now, what's kind of interesting about this, if you've changed this, you can, there's a question about not wanting the synths to follow the chord track. When you come here, you could actually tell, each particular track to follow the chord track. So if you wanted to change the chords here, but maybe you didn't want the piano to change, when you go to your chord track here, you just tell it not to follow the chord track and other tracks to follow the chord track. So you can pick and choose exactly which tracks will follow the chord track and which ones can behave completely independently of that. If you wanted to offset the vocals a little bit, one of the tricks that you could do is if you hold down the shift key, most of the times when you move it, it'll just kind of move the notes chromatically here. But if you hold down the shift key, you can go in between, and this way you can just say, okay, I want that a little sharp or this one to be a little flatter. So the shift key will give you kind of finer control as you adjust the segments there. So that can allow you to kind of humanize it a little bit. All right, now we had a question about, let's go over some using the mix console and mapping it for MIDI faders as well as Magneto. So we'll cover those topics next, and then we'll do a little section on using some of the basic things in Cubase. So like some things that get easily missed. So we'll go over that as well. And if you have questions, please just kind of type them in the comments field, and then we'll kind of adjust them as we'll go through the questions as we go along here. All right, so let's take a look at using our mix console. So let me just open up in our project really quickly. Okay, just. So one of the things that you can do in Cubase is use a lot of different external controllers, or if you wanted to use MIDI to control the volume. And there's a lot of goodies hidden in the control section that are pretty easy to miss. Now, to set up your remote controller for Cubase, you'd want to go to your device setup menu, and then you could actually click right here, and it's kind of a subtle thing, on the little plus sign. So once you click on the plus sign, you can see kind of the drop down list for many different controllers, including like the CMC series, Mackie control. It's a popular format, but there's also a generic remote. So once you kind of go here to the generic remote, this would allow you to have different MIDI faders actually control different faders here within your mix console. And you could set these up to do very advanced things as well. So not just, so by default, you'll see our fader tracks here. So it'll be our kick snare track, our cross stick, our hi-hat, floor tom, mid tom, high tom, our overheads. And then all you need to do here is to actually just tell what MIDI port that you have your remote control device connected to, which port it's communicating with. And then you could actually just come right here and say, okay, fader 1, and then you could actually say this is going to be set up for MIDI controller 7. And one of the great things is if you don't know what controller your device is actually spitting out, is you could just click on the learn, move the fader, and that will automatically capture it. And then this MIDI fader will now control this fader within the mix console. But you could go kind of beyond just what the normal VST mixer does. So if you wanted it to kind of come over here and say, okay, I want it to do transport functions for the device and, start, stop. So all my transport controls, or controlling different aspects within your control room. So if you want to set up generic remotes to switch between different speakers or monitors. So you could do a lot of different control for your VST mix console, excuse me, using different MIDI faders directly here. So that way you could have remote control of your mix console from a typical MIDI fader device. All right, and the next question we'll have is going to be on the Magneto we'll cover, and I see we have a question on video, so we'll cover that as well after we do some basics. So let me just open up a quick project here so you can get a good idea. All right, now Steinberg, I believe it was 1997, was our first program, our first company that actually came out with analog tape saturation. I believe it was modeled after a Lyric 24-track 2-inch tape machine, and it was called Magneto. So it was a incredibly popular plugin in the day, and we had a lot of people wanted us to bring that plugin back because they loved the sound of it. So what we did was kind of reintroduced it with Cubase 7.5. Now we already had within the channel strip in the saturation department here, we already had a tape saturation, but now we've added Magneto 2 in addition to this within the channel strip. So when we look at the actual channel strip, there's going to be two different types of magnetos there, and we could also run it as a plugin as well. So let's say if I want to come here, this is another one that we make through Yamaha called Vintage Open Deck. But let's go ahead and take a look, and you'll find under the distortion set of plugins here, Magneto 2. So we'll just turn this on. Now the interface will be pretty simple. We're going to have your saturation amount. There's a dual mode, which is basically running it through the same saturation again to kind of really get it much bigger. You have kind of an output gain. You could solo the tape, as well as your high frequency adjustment, which is something you see on a lot of analog decks to kind of compensate for when high end signals would get lost. But what's kind of interesting is you could also have just frequency dependent ranges. So if you wanted only the Magneto to affect only the bass frequencies, like for kick or electric bass, you could do that. Or if you only wanted it to affect the mid range for guitars, etc. So it's kind of really good and beefy for that. So let's go ahead and just take a quick listen to it, and we'll make sure that.
I know you're looking good.
So we'll just kind of turn on saturation.
I got some cheap wine. Let's have a good time. I never promised you I'm gonna stick
And now we'll go ahead and turn on the dual mode.
But if you're missing me, let it be. Hit the road. Gonna rock. Gonna roll.
Let's come here and adjust the high frequency adjustment.
Gonna rock. Gonna roll. And I'm go.
Or if you have something that's a little too digital sounding, you could roll off the highs.
We're gonna crank it up and maybe start a fight. Now time is running out, but I'll be back again until the next time.
Now it's gain.
Hit the road, gonna rock.
If you want to just solo what the tape is doing,
Control, hit the road, gonna rock, gonna roll.
listen to it in context.
Hit the road, gonna rock, gonna roll. We got no control. Hit the
And we'll go ahead and bypass it.
gonna roll, and we go. My snakeskin bag, my leather rags is all I ever need. Pants just got some ass and I'm out the door. Hit the road, gonna rock. I got no control. Hit the road, gonna roll.
And we'll adjust the gain,
Go, hit the road, gonna rock.
so there's no gain increase.
Control, hit the road, gonna rock. And we go.
So it's really a great kind of anti-suck plugin. So if you wanted to just kind of turn that directly on your tracks and kind of give it that nice bit of glue, you're able to do that quite effectively with Magneto. The next thing we'll cover is I see a couple more questions. I don't believe the Revelation reverb can be sidechained. A lot of people, another question was, does Magneto limit as well? It will do some limiting, and some people, will kind of get that tape compression sound, but it's, you can kind of get it louder, what a lot of people would use a limiting effect for, but in essence, it's not an actual, by definition, limiter, but you can get some of the same effects, what people often want to use a limiter for. The next thing we'll take a look at is just, we had someone who wanted to see some basic stuff. I find that there's a lot of really neat things in Cubase, just on the main, like front page editing paradigms that are often missed. So this may be basics for some, but there's a good chance that you'll probably learn a trick or two. So, one of the core things of Cubase is actually seeing all of your parts laid out here. I think at one point it was called visual song processing. Cubase has been doing this since 1989, and you can see a lot of the companies actually kind of follow this particular paradigm, because we really haven't had to change this paradigm in 25 years now with Cubase. And when we came out with Nuendo and SX1, we introduced a lot of really kind of neat editing paradigms here. So if you grab the upper left-hand corner handle, excuse me, grabbing the upper left-hand corner handle, you could just do a fade in, just like that. Or conversely, the upper right-hand corner handle, a fade out. The upper center handle will allow you to adjust the volume of the clip. And you could actually come here and get an additional, I think, 12 dB of gain directly there. Or you could actually just adjust directly on your timeline here. In the info line, you can get 24 dB of gain or cut. So if you want to just kind of come here and adjust the volume. And it's also really handy, like if you have, let's say, one vocal or maybe a breath that was really a little too hot, you could just kind of come in here, adjust this. Now, one thing that a lot of people miss is this zooming concept here. So if you take your cursor on the timeline, you can now just kind of zoom right down to the sample level here. So if you wanted to just edit one particular phrase, you could just kind of come here, grab that little clip and adjust the handles of the volume right there. And again, you could just zoom directly right in down to the sample level. So you have your upper handles will do your fades and be your volume control. And your bottom handles have three different modes of working. So one is they'll just resize the events, so the start and end of the events. And if we click right here in the toolbar, or there's also a sizing moves contents. This second option allows you to just kind of come right over here and just, if I start at the beginning of the file, I'll move the beginning of the file right to a particular location. Or if I want the end of the file to be directly there, you could just kind of move the contents of the file as you move the beginning or end of the clip itself. Now, if you wanted to come here, we could also put it into its third mode, and you could do sizing applies time stretch. So this will just make that audio file, stretch it, and do time compression or time expansion to make that automatically fit. Now, if you don't like any of the changes that I've done here, you could actually go to your edit history, and then you could actually just kind of pull up this window here, and now you could scroll through, and you have a linear undo history of every edit that I've done here. Now, if you find that you need yourself to have an non-linear history, we could do this through offline processing. So if I come here, select a range, let's say, okay, I wanted to come here, I could now right click, go to process, and I say, okay, I want to fade out. Or if I wanted to run it through a plugin, such as a chorusing plugin, and let's say I want to reverse the audio. Now, even after I've saved the project, you could choose to come right over here and go to your process, or go, to your audio menu, and go to your offline process history. And what you're able to do now is to actually say, I just want to remove the chorusing without affecting any other aspect. So, or if I wanted to change the coursing preset, or just replace that plugin, or just at this point come right there, and I could remove, even after saving my project or handing it off to someone else. Your offline process history can really save the day. So some of the other tools, so we'll see kind of what you can do with your object selection tool. Now, some of the tools will have additional powers when you hold down like the Alt or Option key. So if I wanted to hold down the Alt key and just go to the bottom right hand corner here, you'll see it turn into a pencil. And when I do that, let me just show you this part here. We'll zoom in just a little bit here, and let's cut this part. So if I want to make a bunch of copies of a part, one way to do it is just to hold down your Alt key. You'll see it turn into a pencil. Go to the bottom right hand corner and drag, and you could just make copies of events. You can also come right here and just hit Control or Command D for duplicate, and you can always hit Control or Command Z for undo. So very, very, very handy things that you can do. Now, just by right mouse clicking, you can also split and cut parts if you wanted to erase parts, or after you cut them, if you wanted to glue them back together, or if you wanted to, again, use your Alt key here. If I say, okay, I wanted to cut this, let's say I have bars and beats selected here in my main timeline, I could cut here, and then just holding down my Alt key, I can make even cuts right there. So if I say, okay, I want to cut at every bar or every couple beats, I could do that very easily using my Alt key. And if I wanted to, let's say, we'll undo that, and let's say if I have a number of cuts here, let me just, so if I hold down my Alt key, and let's say I've made a number of cuts, and if I want to glue those all back at the same time, I can hold down my Alt or Option key, and that will automatically glue everything to the right together in one part. Now, zooming is something that's very easy to do. So we saw this zooming trick right here, where now I could just say, okay, we'll just zoom right in. Now I could also just grab my zoom tool. So if this way I could just kind of select a region and zoom in. And if I wanted to, I could just double click in a blank region, and this will do kind of an undo history of my zooms. So really, really handy. Now coming over here, we also have your mute tool. So you see that as if you don't want to hear parts, you could just mute them very easily, and they'll turn gray, indicating that they are muted. Some of the other tools, you're going to have your play tool. So very, very easy to kind of just, what does this part do? And then your play tool could also turn into a scrub tool as well. So a lot of very, very easy things that you could do on the main project window to kind of get around a little faster and to do all the editing. And that's what kind of makes Cubase really, really fast for a lot of people. All right, I'm going to take a quick look through some of the questions here, and we'll keep going. All right, so I saw a question from Christopher about processing only a single clip. So as you kind of do that, the offline processing, so when you kind of come right over there, you could actually just kind of do only that particular clip. And there's, I believe if you go to preferences, and it's one of the things that you may just kind of turn off at one point, but maybe under audio editing, and you could go right over here, and one of the preferences is under editing, audio, and you can say on processing shared clips. You could choose to create a new version or open the options dialog to create a new one, or just process the existing clip. So that way you can kind of have choice. And I believe it's one of the preferences that often it's like, you click do not, click here and do not show me this again. So I think that will help with your question. All right, so the volume of the play tool, when we actually kind of use the play tool here, this will be routed, or the scrubbing tool, or if you're in the sample editor and you're kind of listening to a particular section, these are all routed through the control room. So if you notice that you have a difference in volume from when you actually kind of play a particular track here versus when you actually listen to it in the mixer solo, at that point, it's going to be going through what's called the audition bus. And the audition bus is kind of set in the control room mixer. So it's going to be using this as your main volume guide as opposed to the traditional mixer. All right, so we had a question about kind of using, why isn't there a multi-tool? So really, you could just kind of right-click to have access, or as you get used to it, just hitting like your one key on the QWERTY keyboard of your computer, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But, you could do so much right here. So, okay, I want to do a fade in. I want to edit the fade. I could just double-click and edit my fade in if you wanted to. Or conversely, if you wanted to just drag parts over, you can just hit the X key and do crossfades. So a lot of that functions right here, and you'll find that switching the tools can be very easy too. Now, one other tool that I failed to mention that's really handy is to actually just grab, if you have, let's say we'll select this part right here. So if I want to take this, I could just grab my pencil tool and I could actually just draw in. So you have a lot of functions kind of right here without necessarily the need to have a multi-tool. But a lot of the functions are really just like right here, and very kind of, as you right click, you'll notice that they're context sensitive. Now if you wonder why sometimes when I right click, I seem to have a lot more options, this is often a preference that's going to be set up. So when you go to editing, you could come right over here to tool modify, to tools, and then you'll see pop up toolbar on right click. And if I have that enabled, which I believe is default mode, you'll see just a small toolbox. So you could just kind of very easily with the small toolbox just kind of come right here and select your tool, and it gives you so many options for doing that. I like to have all the context-sensitive menu options here. So when I go to my preferences, I go to tools, and I like to uncheck that. It's my personal preference. And now I could kind of see everything here, plus all my context-sensitive menu options. All right, so we had a quick question about erasing pops, like from vocals, and this is something often you may get plosives, where you get, those types of sounds in your vocals. Let me just go to a quick vocal part here. We'll take a look. One of the great tools for doing this is actually just kind of using, I probably don't have any, just using, one of my friends in Austin, Texas, he used to call this the cut and run automation system, where he would just literally kind of come here to like every vocal phrase and just kind of cut. And then what he would often do to get rid of plosives is just to cut just the attack and just kind of split it here. So let's say if we felt that this was a bit plosive, kind of just zoom in very easily and just kind of come right there and kind of regulate it. So if you had a plosive that maybe looked like that, you could just take that, and often you don't want to necessarily get rid of things, but you just want to kind of minimize it, and especially with breaths. So often if you kind of, a lot of people will try to get rid of like breath noise through noise gates, and then you have kind of the off-on sound, which can sound very unnatural. But here you could actually just kind of use one track as a noise floor, if you will. And then, especially if you do a lot of dialogue, where if it goes completely silent or it could sound really out of context, it just kind of coming right over here and then being able to use just, the volume handles here, or if you needed to do something even a little faster, just grabbing again your drawing tool right here, and then you could just kind of, on a part directly, just kind of draw in or out your changes that you can see. So that's a great way of kind of doing vocal editing. It can really make a lot more sense. All right, now we had a question on note expression. So we'll go to this. Let me find my note expression demo here. I have one somewhere. All right. And any of our topics, please just kind of, please just kind of type them up, and we'll try to get to them. We'll go to about 9 o'clock or so. It'll give us about 2 hours. All right, one of the things that we wanted to do was to make MIDI a little more expressive. The MIDI specification really hasn't changed since 1982, so it's been 32 years. And while it's been an incredible specification that has spawned in industry, there's some areas that were really kind of lacking. So one of the areas that we wanted to cover this, and this is part of the VST 3.5 instrument specification, which you see in instruments like, Pad Shop, Retrolog, Howling and Sonic SE, the Howling and Sonic, and the full big brother of Howling as well. So let's say if I want to be a little more expressive with my MIDI data, I could come over here. And one of the things that's always kind of a dead giveaway a lot of times is horn sections, because horn sections are 3 different people, 3 or 4 different people playing as a single entity, and are often trying to mimicked by a keyboard. And they could often sound something like this. So all right, so that's often how a keyboard player would play the particular phrase, but it's not necessarily how a brass section would do it. So if I wanted to come here, we could adjust. Now, the problem with the MIDI specification is that as we adjust the volume on one note on a channel, whether it's a hi-hat or a high trumpet part, that the volume events for all the events on that same MIDI channel will be affected the same way. So what a lot of composers have to do is to actually have each voice on a different track, so that when you actually kind of do your processing, that could take a lot more tracks in the MIDI domain. So since the MIDI specification itself doesn't really take advantage of this, one of the things that we want to do is, instead of being limited to just having, let's say, our volume controls here, so let's say if I had my main volume control here, that would affect all the notes equally. Or if I wanted to have pitch bend information here, that would draw in pitch bend for all of the notes. And so if we want to listen to that, So, but we wanted to make this a little more universal. So we could do this paradigm monophonically with any part for any MIDI instrument. But polyphonically within the same MIDI channel is going to be reserved for VST 3.5 instruments. So if I wanted to, I could go to my note expression tab right here. And let's say if I just wanted to draw in volume control. So I could select volume on the left-hand side. And now what I want to do is to just double-click on the note itself. And now what I can do is just kind of draw in my volume for that particular note. And then if you wanted to actually see the note expression data, you could come right over here, and there's a little icon at the top here, so you could see kind of the note expression data. And let's say this note I want, and I'll just grab my line tool, say we want that to get louder right until there, and I want this note to get a little louder but at a different time. Now I could also select different elements here. So if I say, okay, let's grab tuning, I could just double click on this note, so now instead of like having to have 3 or 4 different parts, I could come here so I could have different filters or different panning control all within the same MIDI channel on the same part, and still kind of have my editing directly here on a note by note level. Now some other things that are kind of really neat editing paradigms, if you come here and if you have, let's say, this data turned on, let's say if I wanted to have panning on a particular note, I could select my pan, and let's say I just draw in my data. There's some really cool editing paradigms here. So I could just kind of grab this center line if I wanted to compress the data right here. Or if I grab this line, I could increase or decrease it, or grab its like the ending or the beginning of the clip. So there's a lot of different control elements that you could do here. And what's neat is these can also be applied to our MIDI. We figured that was an interesting paradigm, but if I had, let's say, modulation here, that I could select a range of my modulation data here. And let's say, okay, I just wanted to come here and select just an entire range of the data. I could come here and kind of have the same editing paradigms that I did for my one individual part for various MIDI controllers as well. So at this point I could do it for my MIDI controllers as well as automation for particular parts. So now if I have automation data, I could just draw this in here, and then if I wanted to edit the automation, I could just kind of select it and have the same editing paradigms that we have in our note expression. Now this can also be applied, note expression, for kind of realistic extraction of audio to MIDI. So part of the actual Vari Audio editor, when I come here, let's say we'll go to our pitch and warp menu, is you'll have this extract MIDI functionality. So when I come right here, I could actually have options. So one of the things is I could actually just say, just give me the notes and no pitch bend data, or just give me, just give me the actual notes. But we could also have it extract, pitch bend data to kind of mimic the original audio within the MIDI domain. And, we have a limited resolution within the MIDI domain of, often with most continuous controllers, 128 values. But, music can be a lot more expressive than those 128 values, the resolution that offers. So we also give you an extended resolution with our VST expression. So if I take this audio saxophone here, we'll listen to it. And now we'll take just a MIDI notes extracted from it, but it's going to be the same rhythm, the same pitch. We'll listen to it here. Listen to the saxophone. So it's kind of everything you hate about MIDI in kind of personified in, or in one single part. But now if we extract that MIDI data, and then we could actually have the volume and tuning scales carried over into the VST expression, we can now just listen to it. So if I wanted to play those two together, so the audio and the MIDI here with the note expression. So very, very easy ways of kind of making MIDI a little more expressive to, take it to kind of the next level to have these types of options. So note expressions is really, really powerful technology. We'll get back to, next we'll get into adding video. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to kind of ask them. So if you will go ahead and let me just open up a project that has some video in it. Again, feel free to kind of ask some questions in the comments field. All right, so when we come over here to the video, we could just add video tracks. So it's a track classification. So we could just add a video track, and as we do this, we can see you'll see the video thumbnail window appear here on our timeline. And then we could also see, if we go to your device menu, you could go to your video player, and you could open that up directly there. So now if I wanted to actually kind of find in or out points, it's kind of very easy if you just kind of move the cursor in the timeline. Excuse me. You could find kind of your in and out points of the video. Now, if you wanted this to be a particular moment in time, you could also just, I believe if you go to your project menu and go to project setup, at this point you could, one of the things to be very kind of cognitive of is making sure that the frame rate matches. And one of the features that you're going to have here is to get the frame rate from the video itself. So at this point, I got a composer that came to our club Cubase in New York recently who was having all sorts of different sync problems, and he just had a video frame rate mismatch. So, but at this time, you could also just do your display offsets, and you can say this will be bar 1 right here, etc. And you could move the actual video file itself within your timeline, just like a part. So if I wanted to come here, I could just pick up the part and say, okay, right here is this video start is right at measure 1 or whatever. So at this point now, once you've composed all of your music, let's say for the video cue, you have the option to, and you could export your file, like your mixdown as a stereo or, you know, your mixdown project. And then once you've done that, you could come right over here, and there's a function for replace audio in the video file. And that will, excuse me, that will take your mixdown and then embed that audio directly within the video file. Now, generally for the video file information, you want to be using a QuickTime file. That is kind of what the video engine has been written for. But it's a very, very easy way of having your timeline here. Now, one trick that's really handy is you may notice that as I scroll down in my project, I could have my video thumbnail always kind of at the top. And this is called the divide track list feature. So if you kind of go right over here, let me see if I can find it. You'll see so this little icon right here is your divide track list. So once you kind of come here, you could say, okay, I always want my video to be on the top, and you could have like your lead vocal track or different tracks always in this divided track list area. So as you scroll up and down, and again, it's like the little icon that looks like a little slash right there. So that's a very, very handy trick for working with videos or having everyone and, you know, having all of your tracks, marker tracks, you know, video tracks or lead vocal directly on top. All right, I'm seeing a real quick question on how to learn function for using computer keys, using the keyboard keys to change the input channel from the keyboard. Let's see, I'm just going to read this question real quick. So there's the question from Thomas asking about if there's a way to learn function to program using the keyboard keys on your MIDI keyboard. As long as that is actually spitting out MIDI information, you could come here to the generic remote and click on the learn function. To see if it's actually spitting out anything, another way is to actually, if you have a MIDI track, to come right over here and let's say, okay, we have a MIDI track here. And then one of the MIDI plugins that you'll see as an insert is a MIDI monitor. So as you come right over here, you could just kind of turn this on, this little plugin. And at this point, you could just activate it, and that will actually capture whatever MIDI message that you have in your system. So if your MIDI controller, by hitting the knobs, is spitting out MIDI information, you could use that to capture. Not everyone does, not all the controllers do that, but you can just simply, you know, if it does, you'll be able to see it captured there. We had a question from Mark about time code, probably in reference to the video. So one of the things that you could do is have your master time zone, your master time reference here set to SMPTE time code. So you could actually just see your SMPTE time code directly there, and now you could just kind of navigate by frame or seconds, minutes. Now as you do this, you could also, if you go to your device menu, there's going to be a time display, I believe. So if you activate right here, and this will follow your master SMPTE timecode resolution as well. So you could just kind of see this. But if I switch this to bars and beats, that's what the value you see there. Or if I put it in seconds, or put it into time code. All of the entire resolution of everything in Cubase is going to be sample accurate, and you could choose whatever time format you actually want to see it in. So you could just simply right click here on a transport to set kind of the master time code. And if you need to change, again, the time code format, or you could come right over here to your project setup. And then at this point, once you come right over here, you could have not only your so you have it on your SMPTE time code directly there. And at that point, you could have, all your various frame rates, especially if you're doing high def video. You can just have all the various frame rates there. All right, let's see if there are any other topics you guys want to cover. If you want to actually just kind of type it in the comments field. All right, if you guys, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the new track visibility configurations. So when we want to work with large projects, sometimes it could be a little problematic in that as we're kind of scrolling through, let's say, lots and lots of tracks. Okay, I see some more questions coming in. We'll get to those in just a minute. So let's say like this project here is about 100 and so tracks going on. So sometimes dealing with really large projects can be really, really difficult and can be a bit problematic in just managing and being able to find all of your different tracks. So one of the things that was implemented in Cubase 7.5 was the ability of coming right over here, and you have your track visibility settings. I see a question about if this will be archived for someone that just got in late for Edwin. So yeah, this will be available online, so you guys could watch it. So you can catch the earlier topics as well, no problem. So if I want to come here to my visibility, so we have our inspector here, and we kind of introduced this concept with the mix console in Cubase 7. But one of the great things is we can now do it on our project window. So if I say, okay, I want to take all of my drums. Now, if I wanted to just see my drum parts, I could hold down the Shift key and actually just view just my drums, and I could create a configuration here. So I'm going to call this one drums. And then let's say I want to do the next one, and again, hold down the Shift key. And then we'll create a configuration, and we'll call it bass. And we'll call this keyboards. And we'll do kind of world instruments. And guitars. then we'll say vocals. So now if I wanted to just only see particular areas, I could just say, okay, I only want to see my bass, only want to see my drums, my rolled instruments, my guitars, or only want to see vocals. So we could see only particular tracks. Now, if you click just to the right of the visibility, you can also synchronize this with the mix console. So every time you open up the mix console, these two will be completely synchronized. Now, we could also filter out particular types of tracks. So I could say, I don't want to see instrument tracks, group tracks, or effects tracks, or other tracks. I just want to see audio MIDI, or I want to see all different track types. But you could also, very interestingly, come here and say, okay, I want to show all the tracks. Now, as you do this, there's some other interesting options where you can say, show only selected channels. So you say, okay, I only want to have these channels selected. So I can set up a condition to show only those particular channels, or show only tracks that are playing between the left and right locator. But here's a really interesting one. Let's say you hear like a really weird part. You could say show tracks with data only at the cursor position, and this will hide every track that isn't playing at that moment in time. Now, if you need more kind of detailed agents, you could actually create them in your project logical editor. So you could say, okay, show me media tracks that are audio with the name vocal in it, and toggle its visibility. So you could actually set up your own different MIDI conditions. So as you work with this, you can now see exactly what you need to see, when you need to see it, and effectively kind of manage all of your tracks. Because I've seen many sessions with 200-300 tracks, and composers with 1,300, 1,800 tracks, all within one project. So this way they can effectively manage the large projects. All right, so we had a question from Mark about the difference between parts and events. A lot of times they're pretty similar, but in what type of editor you want to deal with. So when you have and I believe when you come over here, this will be an event, and this will take you directly to the sample editor. Now, if it's actually set up where you go to audio and then you say events to part, this could take you to a part editor here. And this used to be kind of an early way of working with like different comp parts. Many people would use the part editor here to come up with multiple, for doing comping. But that's obviously kind of changed with lanes and the capability of using the comp tool, which came in Cubase 6.5, or even the brand new track versions. But still, a lot of people use the part editor for doing comping. So what's one of the a lot of times they'll play back the same, sound the same, but the part editor, when it's set to a part, that will take you directly into the part editor, and when it's set to the event, directly into the sample editor. All right, we had a question about how do you keep the timeline in the center when you hit play. So I think I haven't done this in a long time. This might be a preference. Let me see if I can find this really quickly. See if it's in the transport menu. I'm kind of blanking on this. Let me see if I can find it in the preferences. I may have to come back to this question. Okay, so I believe if we come here, the question about setting up the so it's all right, so about keeping the timeline in the center of the project. So we'll go to transport, and then you'll see stationary cursor. So now kind of as we're playing,
we need humanity. More than machinery, more than machinery. We need humanity, humanity.
So if you go to preferences, and then back to transport, then you could activate the stationary cursor right there. And that way, the cursor will always stay in the center. Let's get back to, we saw a question again about the parts being processed with some of the effects and worried about tails. So if I wanted to come here, let me just make this part, and we'll just take this dissolved apart. And then I believe you could, when you do the processing, we'll just take a quick look at it. Let's say we add a reverb plugin. So I believe that it's automatically compensated for. I would have to test just to make sure. But I believe that the tail will automatically kind of be incorporated directly with the process. I could check afterwards just to make sure. And then there's a quick question from Cameron about if some of these features are not available in Cubase 6.5. Some of the features are not in 6.5, like the track visibility, the track versions. So a lot of that I believe is going to be found in 7 and or 7.5. So okay, we had a quick question. Can we break out the mix console version 7 from project window as on previous versions of Cubase? Yeah, so when you open up the mix console window, you can just kind of come right over here and just have it be a completely independent window. So if you wanted to place it onto a different monitor, or you could also just right click on it and have that be full screen mode directly on that monitor. So Sam's question on will this be recorded? It is being recorded and it will be available to watch afterwards. So the question on is there an effective way to remove wetness from a vocal recording in Cubase, like clicks, gurgles? One of the ways that I often will do with vocals, let me just pull up a project that might be a little where you run into that, and we're talking about this in a little bit of the basics section. But if you have a vocal here, maybe you have some like headphone bleed or some, other types of editing, often necessarily kind of getting rid of everything may not be the best. So let's say if we wanted to zoom in on this waveform here, and like this is a little bit of a breath or lip smack, that type of thing, is again just kind of selecting it with the range tool. And when you see the range tool and the other tools and they kind of snap a little farther than you want, you may just have to deactivate the snap, and you could do that by hitting the letter J. So if I wanted to just kind of really just take this little snap here, I could say, let's just grab that phrase. And then if you wanted to just cut, you could come right here. And you could, there's a couple ways. One is you could split and just kind of cut that. And you could have it automatically on the 0 crossfading, the 0 crossings. And you could just really minimize it quite effectively. Or you could actually just set up a condition here where as you do your processing, you can say, okay, I have that range selected. Let me just go to my processing and go to gain and say, okay, every time I see this, I want that to go down in gain like 7 dB and just kind of hit process. And that way you could actually have kind of, different processes set up and just do it on the selected range. And it's a pretty effective way of cleaning up vocals. All right, well, I'll take a quick look through some of the other questions. All right, so there's a question from Cameron on the CMC modules. I use the CMC modules myself. I use the one I probably use the most is the PD unit, which is the drum pads. And one of the things that I like to do is to I set up for my personal use. I set up a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So I could actually come here, and one of the cool things with the, I don't have it connected currently, but when you have the pad controller, there's a little software utility. I think I should have it installed here. It may not allow me to kind of boot it up. But you go to the PD editor. And if you put this into bank 16, the cool thing is once you have this connected, the 16 pads could actually be used to trigger any keyboard shortcut function inside of Cubase. So you'd come over here and go to your device setup, and then if you add let me see if it'll allow me to kind of add it without it physically connected. No. And then, so I have like 16 additional keyboard shortcuts set up for my pad. I also use the CC121, so I use that for my fader, transport controls, and my quick controls. So with that, I find myself using the pad, and then using the AI knob is also really great. So, with the CC121, that's kind of almost like multiple CMC units. Kind of put together the functionality, but I do find that controllers that can, often when you find that you're using them and you're not looking at them, that can really kind of make your workflow much faster. So with me, the first time I started playing with the CC121, and then it got taken away from me after a couple of days, I kept reaching for it. So kind of like that. So my CC121 is in my left hand. My mouse is in my right hand. And to the right of that, I have a PD controller. But the CMCs are very inexpensive. But the great thing is you can place them in other locations. So you can put it on top of your MIDI controller, next to your computer keyboard, next to your mouse, on your leg. You can kind of place them if you're left-handed, right-handed. So, I think most of the people that do have them, as you're seeing the comments kind of come in, do find them quite handy. All right, Thomas had asked about I think the mix console and using it, I think, as a within a separate window. So again, if you come over here, go to your mix console. It's just a complete independent window. So this way you can kind of move it around. And one of the great things about the mix console is its ability to kind of be customly sized, to be custom configured to whatever configuration that you really want for your particular studio monitor setup. So it's really, really handy for that. Let me scroll through, see if I missed any questions that have come up. All right. This will be kind of, we'll see here. We have we're in our little delay zone. So we'll see if you guys have more questions. We'll be wrapping up in just a couple minutes. And I hope you guys have found this handy. It's a new format that we're just trying out tonight. So hopefully you guys like it and have learned a trick or two. And, you know, as we do this in the future, maybe we'll try to do it every first Tuesday of the month as a rule of thumb. So we could try to do that. So maybe the first Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, if that works for everyone. We could plan on that. So whenever that happens in March. But we'll see if there's more questions coming in. And again, the video will be online here if you want to watch, and you can check out the videos here or on the Steinberg Software YouTube channel. So there's a lot of great resources of stuff to learn. We'll see if there's any more last minute questions. If not, we'll wrap up. We'll just a couple minutes early. Seeing if I missed any questions that you guys had asked. All right, I'll wait another minute, see if there's any more questions kind of coming in. All right, and if you want to, for future Club Cubase online Google Hangouts here, if you want to actually kind of just send your questions to the Club Cubase channel via email, we could get everything prepared. But any topics that you guys want to cover, anything you're not quite understanding in the manual, we want to help you guys. I don't see any more questions kind of coming in, so we'll choose this point to kind of wrap up. We have about 4 minutes left, so we'll wrap it up just a couple minutes early. I'd like to thank you guys for checking out the first Google Club Cubase Hangout, and hope you guys got something out of it. It's kind of a new format for us, and if you have any other comments, just feel free to email the channel, or you could email me at Gondo, Gondo, at yamaha.com. We hope you all learned something, and we'll plan on doing the first Tuesday at 7 p.m. in March. Thank you very much.